welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about some XRP related topics. In the past week or so, Ripple has made some kind of buzz in the marketplace around launching stablecoins, and specifically stablecoins that are going to be hosted and minted and used on the XRP ledger. And some questions came up around like whether or not this is like an alternative to XRP, whether these stable coins are somehow like competitive. And I wanted to paint the picture of how I see this ecosystem evolving. And this is the impression I've been under for a couple of years. This is not new. And I don't have any access to any really insider information that no one else has. I just have been discussing like how this all fits together for a long time. And all of the new things that have been coming out in the news are simply confirming and reaffirming this belief that I've had for some time. Okay, so I'm going to set the stage for a couple of key things. The most important thing to understand is that the US dollar, which has been the dominant global currency for trade and for store of value, has created some problems. And namely, that the people who control the US dollar system, which I used to think were like Americans like us, I'm not so sure anymore. It's not really clear exactly who owns the Federal Reserve, which is the entity in the United States that kind of has the power to print a lot of money. However, there is also this other thing that commercial banks print money like crazy, and that doesn't seem to get as much attention. However, in the global marketplace, the US dollar, particularly since the 70s when the petrodollar agreement was launched, the US dollar has been the dominant currency to buy commodities globally, specifically oil, among other things. And what we've seen happen is, unfortunately, if any nation tries to step out of that system and attempts to trade oil specifically in another currency, bad things happen to that leader. There's a very interesting story about Saddam Hussein attempting to sell oil in euros, and that did not end well for him, obviously. Now, who knows the truth about what Saddam Hussein was really like? I've never been to Iraq. I just rely on what I read in the media, and I now am pretty confident that the media is used as a tool to manage perceptions. And if they wanted all of us to be really mad at Saddam Hussein, it's not that hard to just use the media for that purpose. But that's a different rabbit hole for a different day. There is also Muammar Gaddafi, former head of Libya, who attempted to create a gold-backed currency for the continent of Africa, kind of like a BRICS type of currency, but for all these African nations, backing it by gold. That also did not end well for him. So historically, countries that have challenged the dominance of the dollar system get into hot water and are often removed from the political scene. So even if you want to debate or argue on those particular examples, just go read John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and he explains, as a former insider who worked in the CIA and industry, how dollars are used globally for political reasons. So I think we can agree, though, that the dollar system has created this opportunity for bullying, and that if any country around the world does not want to participate in the dollar system, it is very difficult for them to do that. So what has happened is it gave the issuer of the global reserve currency, the dominant one, a lot of power on the stage, and that power can easily be abused. Other nations don't necessarily want to be in a subservient position to that power. So we've had a lot of wars and conflicts that are often tied into this. So if you wanted to create a better system where we had global peace, you don't want to have another nation be in charge, the global cop, a nation be in charge of everyone else. Then kind of related to that is this idea of the Triff Dilemma. So if before I kind of knew a lot of this stuff, when I would discuss with people, you know, who do we think is going to be the next sort of global player monetarily on this in the stage and the supply chain, the logical guess that came up a lot was China. China's economy was booming in terms of its manufacturing. I mean, Chinese products are like prevalent in every single country that I've been to. particularly, specifically in the United States as well. And so the question came, well, if China's just doing so well and the dollar's on its way out, like, would China now become the issuer and manager of the global reserve currency? And this is the Triff Dilemma. And the answer is not really. I don't think China wants that job, because what happens is when you are the issuer of the global reserve currency, your currency becomes very strong relative to others. So basically your stuff becomes very expensive. And this is why, if you look historically back at manufacturing in the United States, specifically like in the 90s and the early 2000s, a lot of manufacturing jobs left the United States and went overseas. And one of the real reasons that happened was it's just much more expensive to make things in the United States relative in other countries, because of these exchange rates that are a function of the dollar being so strong and being in demand constantly for global trade. So unfortunately, a lot of jobs around manufacturing left the United States, and American products overseas became less competitive because they were too expensive due to this issue. So if China were to now become the issuer of the global reserve currency, think of like one of the reasons a lot of Chinese products do well in the global marketplace is they're very inexpensive. I owned a manufacturing business for a couple of years, and a lot of our like boxes and bottles and, things that we had to use for packaging, they all come from China, and they were a fraction of the cost of what you would get if you tried to buy American made products. And there are often, in many cases, weren't even as many like sizes and shapes in United States based products, because they're just not as competitive due to this issue. So if China were to become, the issuer of the global reserve currency and Chinese products become very expensive globally, that would be massively disruptive to China's economy. Like, they depend on these exported things. So why would China want that? And then are they also going to be expected to have like the dominant military that is very expensive and kind of aligns with the military industrial complex profit motives? It never really seemed like China wanted that job, because there are a lot of kind of consequences to that. So if there's no other real contender, what do you do when you want to have global peace? You do not want to repeat the same mistake of giving one country all of this power because they issue this currency. And number three, you have this Triff Dilemma thing. So any nations that are resource rich or produce products for export, those exports now become less competitive when that country is issuing the global reserve currency, because it's just too strong relative to others. So the next question would be like, all right, well, how could we have a global reserve currency that isn't issued by a country? Well, enter stage left XRP. So XRP can be used to facilitate the exchange of one currency to another currency without allowing either of those parties to hold vast sums of those currencies. If you understand just the basic idea of a bridge currency, that's functionally what it is it allows me to be on one side of the river, you to be on the other side of the river, you hold your currency, I hold my currency. When we go to trade, we just go through this XRP gateway to allow goods and services to be exchanged. So that means, though, that every nation has to have its own sovereign currency, which we do now. So there's not really a change to that. The issue just becomes globally, when countries are trading with each other, what are they buying and selling stuff in? So if the United States continues to have a dollar, it might be a little bit of a different dollar we'll talk about in a second, and another country like Mexico has pesos, and we go to trade, Mexico keeps its sovereign currency, United States keeps its sovereign currency, and XRP is used for the trade. So these sovereign currencies, which are mostly digital now, could be issued in a different way, though, via the blockchain and as digital assets. And one of the labels that is being used to describe a nation's sovereign currency that exists on the blockchain is this idea of a CBDC. Now, a CBDC stands for central bank digital currency. It just means that the central bank of a nation issues this currency via the blockchain. We already have that in that the Fed issues like its Federal Reserve made up money and gives that to commercial banks that are kind of used to create loans and whatnot. And, there's a lot of opacity, like, opaqueness around how that really works. none of us learn in school how the Federal Reserve creates money. I don't think they really wanted citizens and people to truly have a deep understanding of that. But in the idea of a central bank digital currency, you would have a central entity issue the nation's sovereign currency, and they would manage their own monetary policy, whether it's backed by gold or backed by nothing. I mean, each country should, in my opinion, have the right to decide what kind of currency do they want to have for their citizens. Now, there's been a lot of chatter for quite some time, and I'm a believer in this, that the United States will be moving to a different monetary system that might look the same at surface level, but behind the scenes is operating differently. And it will be backed by hard assets like gold, and it'll have to be, I'll explain that in a second. And it would be issued by a central entity versus all these different commercial banks issuing their own currency. Now, whether or not it's the Fed or the Treasury now becomes an interesting topic of debate. There was chatter a couple of years ago that as part of the 2020 CARES Act, the Federal Reserve was rolled back under the Treasury and is no longer operating as like a third-party entity answering to shareholders. I'd love to be able to find out how true that is. It seems like there are some things lining up to have that be the case, but the jury's still out. So whether or not the dollar is issued by the Fed as a third party or the Fed under the Treasury is still something we are figuring out. Now, there's a scariness around this label of CBDC because blockchain money has the ability to integrate with a smart contract. And a smart contract are a set of rules that would be kind of programmed into the money that could limit potentially what you could spend it on. It could put these things called negative interest rates in there, which kind of don't make sense at first, but it's really a way to incentivize you to spend your money instead of encouraging you to save it. Those are tactics that could be potentially used. Interestingly, on the XRP ledger, smart contracts are not as prevalent, or they're not really being used. They're kind of built into the base layer of the the blockchain code, which is sort of the whole AMM thing that came out a couple weeks ago, but I digress. So there is concern though that if countries had a retail CBDC and smart contracts were used, that there could be a political agenda tied into that. Now, I think though we are at the stage globally where so many people are awake and understanding of this, it would be a lot harder for a central bank to pull that off without people making a big stink about it. So I'm a lot less concerned about the nefarious CBDC scenario than I was a couple of years ago, just having watched the great awakening and understanding of the fact that we maybe should be so blindly trusting in our governments, and they often do things that are not for our interests. And if we just sit back and comply, then they'll just keep doing it. So each country around the world will issue their own currency. They already have been doing this. If they are now issued on the blockchain, they would be called a digital currency. And if they are issued by a central entity, whether that is the central bank or their kind of treasury equivalent, then that could be a CBDC. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if a country has a CBDC that it will be used for these nefarious reasons. That's sort of the point that I'm making. And if you think about the kind of macro global supply chain and global trade, you have each country with its own money backing it by hard assets to prevent things like inflation from getting out of hand, and also instilling trust in that currency within the people. That country still needs to trade with another country, and that's where XRP comes in. Now there's we wrote that paper last year about XRP valuation models, and two of the models really look at this idea of what's called collateralization, where if all of the financial products in the world were kind of trading and exchanging through XRP as this kind of bridge currency, then countries and banks and institutions are going to need to have XRP to facilitate all of those exchanges. And yes, you could go to like a Ripple platform product or whatever, like ODL, or the names are changing, and just buy the XRP you need for that moment and make your exchange and then sell the XRP and be done with it. The problem with that though is, what if you kind of got there one day and there wasn't enough XRP? Like you might be left not being able to get it. That's a possibility. Number two, the price of XRP over time as demand increases could go up. So you might end up paying more for it than you would have otherwise. And if you're only holding it for a moment, maybe that's no big deal. But if you're like, hey, I could get a whole bunch of this stuff at like 10 cents, and now it's trading at $10,000, like it would have been a good idea to get in early if you had the money. This is where the whole options agreements thing comes with the escrow, is that were institutions promised XRP at a very low price once specific conditions were met so that they could kind of move into this new ecosystem and have gotten the assets at a lower price. Now, the question then becomes, I'm going to jump topics a little bit here. Often when these news things come out, like the stable coins being issued on the XRP ledger, and now each sovereign nation is going to have stable coins, and Ripple is now going to be minting, I guess, a dollar stable coin on the XRP ledger that is backed by actual dollars. The question people have are like, well, why isn't this affecting the XRP price? Why is XRP still 50 cents? Well, first of all, one of the whole real points of the Ripple SEC lawsuit is that Ripple is not in charge. It's not the issuer of XRP. They use it as a tool, as an exchange of value, but it's not the same as Ripple stock. So if every time Ripple announced something, the price of XRP went up, it would be pretty hard for Ripple to say that XRP is not a security and is not tied to their actions and their performance in the marketplace. It's supposed to be independent. That was kind of the conclusion from XRP being not a security, and it's not a Ripple product. It's something that Ripple uses in the same way they could be exchanging value via gold. They're not, the actions of one company are not going to drive the price of gold up globally, generally. Okay, so we're back to this thing about why is the price of XRP not moving with all of this news about how this ecosystem is coming together? Well, this brings back to some of the stuff we talked about in that paper, which is this idea of the virtuous cycle, and that XRP is very different than a stock. It's very different than a speculative asset where it trades on hype. Like the purpose of it is to be a stable bridge currency that nations and other institutions can use to exchange value globally. If that price is bouncing around because of stuff that's on TV, that's going to be a pain for like these institutions that want to have, stability for global trade. So how does the price of this asset actually go up? So a couple of things. One, humans make agreements and they set prices. So the idea that that cannot happen is naive. I mean, go back to the Plaza Accord in the 1980s, global exchange rates between countries were set. So that's happened. Do I think that's going to happen with XRP? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, if those agreements have already been made, it's possible, but I think you're naive to assume that that could not happen. What I think is more likely to happen, though, is what we saw in Dr. Dion Baucus's model, which is that initially, as we start to ramp up and see adoption, maybe with a couple of these different use cases, the asset is going to go up in value like a bit. Let's say, right now it's like 50 cents. So let's say it goes up to $10. Now, people who have been holding XRP for a long time are going to be beside themselves and see a really amazing ROI on that investment. So what'll happen is the patient retail investors, many of them will sell, and that will probably drive the price back down. Now, if you are a nation who is using this asset as some kind of collateral for something, that's a problem because now it's gone back down again. So there's going to be a group of financial institutions that are going to wait for this first pump and downturn to happen before like the real big kids step in. And this plays into this idea of the virtuous cycle, which are two competing forces. One, which is utility. So I'm using XRP to make these exchanges. I'm buying it. I'm selling it. It is part of an active like global marketplace. And what's going to happen, and this is my belief, is that countries around the world, like large institutions that hold billions, potentially trillions of dollars, have to hold their treasuries in some form of asset. Historically, a lot of nations have been holding them in US treasury bonds, but they've been seized, which has made it scary. Like if you're in charge of a country's treasury, like the country depends on that, and you're holding it at something, and if you piss off the dollar people, they could just take it. That's a really big problem because you need that money to serve the interests of your people. So think there's less interest or less confidence in using US Treasuries, US bonds as a way to store a nation's value. So what else are you going to store it in? Well, looks like this XRP asset is becoming more widely used, and if it's going to be going up steadily, even slowly in value, that's actually great for my treasury because it's like a savings account with interest, kind of. So this then creates this excitement, and institutions start to use XRP to store their value, because you've got to store it in something. Now you could say, well, store it in your own sovereign currency, and that's possible, but you might be a small nation with kind of a weak currency. You might want to hold your nation's sovereign wealth in something that is maybe more stable than your small nation's currency. All right, so now you got these countries with watching this utility happen, and they start to see that it's going up in value, so they store more value in XRP. What that does is it removes circulating supply, because if I'm storing my wealth in a bunch of XRP, that XRP is not going to be used for transactions, like it's in like the vault. So less supply is available for transactions, the price goes up. Now the people who are sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out where to store their wealth, now it's going up even more. And you're like, hey, this XRP thing is getting more and more valuable. It seems like a good place to store my country's wealth. And you know what? We need this XRP for trade anyway. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1. We can store our wealth in there, and then when we need to use it for transactions, we can do so. And no nation issued XRP. So if you get into a squabble between countries, no country can go and like seize your XRP from you. Like if you're two independent nations, like this is where this global peace thing comes in, is that XRP can't be used as a political tool because it's a public blockchain. Like how would France go and seize, Uganda's XRP? How would they do that? They don't have that authority in the blockchain world. Where if, the Central Bank of Europe, the ECB, is issuing bonds and some countries holding their wealth in those bonds, and you kind of get in trouble with the European Union, those bonds can be seized and held, and your wealth can be confiscated from you. And so I think when people who are XRP retail investors think about this stuff, you forget, like, we are tiny little groups like holding an asset that's really designed for this global stage, and our interests aren't really the priority. And that isn't to be mean or dismissive. It's just when you're trying to solve the issue of global peace and the problems from having one nation be the issuer of the global reserve currency, the concerns of the retail XRP holder, they're just not that big of a deal. And here's Ripple attempting to kind of create this new payment rail system where money's moved globally via this system and uses XRP as this asset. And they're creating the infrastructure for each nation to issue their own sovereign digital currency that they can hold and use within the country for all their things, like, if there's taxes or you got to pay for stuff, your paycheck, your payroll type things, you have to have a currency to do all that stuff in. And they're creating that infrastructure. And then when it comes to being trading globally, the money moves through XRP. So this idea that Ripple has some kind of obligation to retail investors who have bought this asset is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, they're tackling a far bigger problem than some individual person's investment portfolio. And I don't think Ripple, the real Ripple, not these sort of fake bots on YouTube. Ripple has not been telling any retail people to go and hold this asset for investment purposes. The intention here is to create a new, far more evolved money system globally that will allow nations to be independent and sovereign and not be under this yoke of the dollar system. So I think everything that we're seeing confirms this thesis that we don't want to have a nation be the issuer of the reserve currency. That power is abused. That power can be used to subjugate other countries and worse, start wars and killing leaders if you don't comply with that agenda. And so to replace the dollar with another sovereign nation is just going to make that a different problem, like the same problem with a different label on it. And so we want to get to a world where no nation is in charge. So we all kind of act like in the United States, we have 50 states, right? And so in the Senate, which I think acts like organized crime, but we'll just pretend for a minute that it's what it was intended to be. You have these kind of 50 states sitting side by side in a room saying, let's resolve these issues. We all get to vote on them. No one state is in charge of all the other states. That's where I think we want to go in terms of independent republics around the world who are able to operate, with their own sovereignty and their own authority over themselves, but they still have a way to participate in the global supply chain, because not every nation has all the resources that they need. If you happen to be in a location where there isn't oil or can't grow food as easily as other places, we want to have this supply chain to enable that type of a thing. So I think all of this is very good news. If you are of the impatient mindset regarding the value of XRP, you got to wait for the virtuous cycle to kick in, where these competing forces of utility and store of value start to do their magic, and stop expecting anything Ripple does or anything coming in the news or any press releases to have a material impact on the price of XRP, the market price of XRP. And that's because we don't actually want that. We want this to be a more stable asset that is used globally to solve this very, very serious problem of the global reserve currency. And it's going to take some time for that to happen. So anyway, I hope this explanation made sense. I wanted to clear up some of this confusion. I think there's been some fear around whether or not this stablecoins, this sort of dollar stablecoin on the XRP ledger is somehow competitive to XRP. I don't think it is at all. I think it's quite complementary and fits into this ecosystem map of each nation having their own sovereign independent currency and being able to use XRP to facilitate cross-country trades. And that doesn't mean that's the only thing XRP could be used for, but that to me is like a very big problem, global peace and this war machine. And this is a solution to help completely shift humanity into a very different type of world. So, all right, see you in the next one.